Dan, I apologize if I just offended you or seem like a dick right now because I'm armchair pop psychologizing you based on my own feelings. I could just be projecting. So, Dan, you're the shit and you know it. I thought I'd been recording for a while. I guess I hadn't started yet. Good thing I hadn't picked a topic yet. God, there's so much stuff that I want to talk about. I don't know what to talk about right now, honestly. Let's throw myself under the bus once again and talk about some bad habits. And I want to talk about these bad habits in hopes that you hear them and think, I do that. I wonder if it's a bad habit or if it's just the way that I work. The first of these bad habits, inventing very complicated sort of rituals in lieu of concepts, or that your concepts are predicated on them. So I think I made fun of myself fairly recently for making a piece that even at the time I referred to as my bad non-format ripoff. It was a poster and it had the logo of the sort of event was the name of this exhibition, and then it had all these like leaves and screws and random crap piled off of it. Oh man, now I'm on 55, it sounds like shit. Let's see if we ever get this video started. I'm having a rough day, guys. Oh man, this actually is great because we're gonna cover a couple different things here. So the exhibition was called Minneapolis 55404, and it was a juried show open to artists who lived and worked in that zip code. So my concept was to go for a walk throughout that neighborhood and pick up detritus. So leaves, screws, crushed cans, pens, whatever it was, and this big pile of stuff. And then I photocopied all those objects so that I could have a silhouette of them. Then took like micron Pigma pens and traced all of those silhouettes and inked them. And then I scanned that back in. And then I used those scans with the typeface, and that's how I ended up doing my bad non-format ripoff. And what's interesting to me is that I was so clueless that I missed the boat on this in such a big way. So, on the one hand, I didn't know how to truly articulate an idea versus a design concept. There was a really nice idea in there, which is the metaphor of whether it's making art out of what's around you or documenting the overlooked aspects of that area. But I only had these graphic design ideas. And then because that idea was weak, rip-off non-format, I invented this fucking convoluted process. There was no need for the inking, tracing, coloring part of that. I was only doing it to invest time in it and therefore to invest myself in it. Now, of course, like this is me psychoanalyzing 2004 me or 2005 me, but it's very true. That's absolutely what I was doing. And I didn't recognize how to do conceptually driven exploration or what an idea really was. So, as I've said, there's a really nice idea in there, but potentially a better way of handling the whole animal would be to list out all the ways that I could have done that. So how could I do that? I could do it via gathering up objects. I could do it via photography. I could do it via, I could shoot videos. I could talk to people. I could record insights, a lot of different ideas. But I just had this one idea. I didn't recognize what the real idea was, or what I would now call the insight. I didn't recognize the insight to celebrate the everyday or something like that. And there's tons of ways of dealing with that. It's so funny because who knows? I mean, I probably had creative block, or maybe I was like, hey, I could do this. But it's such a sad concept, and it's so typical of how my head worked at that point. Let's see if I can think of another one. The same exhibition the year before that, I took a map of the neighborhood, traced it again because of course I traced it. 2 days before I'd seen a lecture by Graphic Thought Facility, and they showed all this incredibly nerdy work where a concept was embedded in every single aspect of the work. So I was like, okay, I need a concept and a convoluted thing attached to everything. So my solution to that was find a map, trace the map, make this lettering based on some detail from the map that then had this additional component that it was related to graffiti, and our building was covered in graffiti. It had a public wall where you were allowed to paint. And then there was the typography that I think was all Helvetica, and for some reason it needed to be printed, photocopied, and hand cut into place. Why? I do not know. These were things that I did to make the work more difficult, therefore to make it seem more conceptual. And then on top of that, each flyer was cut down from a larger chunk of the map. Like, okay, cool, the 4 flyers are they have a different configuration of lines in the background. Like, oh, why does that matter? A complete inability to do research and then to understand how to extract something from that research that was an actual idea. And what's funny with both of those is there are ideas in there. Those ideas are much simpler than the nonsense physical movements that I had to put myself through. I think I just did that because then I had something to talk about. I could be like, oh, so I did this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And it's just like, it was this bullshit to make it seem like I had done more work than I had. And the thing is, like, I had done a lot of work. So it's almost like to make it seem like I had ideas that I didn't have. And it took a long time to undo all of that kind of insanity. But that was a really typical way of working. When I was a student, I did a lot of convoluted processes, and we were very much in the mode of like, we worked on one thing. So having incredibly dumb ideas, which is pretty much my modus operandi, having a convoluted way of expressing that idea, then it made it seem like, I don't know, like I was smart. Like, oh, cool. Like now I'm like 2x4 or Graphic Thought Facility because I didn't know how to get that investment in the work in some other fashion. And now I get that investment in the work through process. I was going to make this video like 3 symptoms of terrible design process, but instead we'll make this like 1 symptom of terrible design process, making shit way too complicated so that you feel like you are smart or that you've done something, but you're masking some lack. Take all the shit that a normal human being is not going to care about and strip that away. If you want photocopied textures in something, not because they look cool, because frankly that's a good reason, but you just want them in there so you can talk about the labor you put into it, fucking stop. That's incredibly dumb use of your time, you're compensating for something. If you have to invent these physical hoops for you to go through to do something, something's wrong with your process. I'm going to take one of my dear friends and then kind of throw him under the bus a little bit. But one of my big inspirations, not influences, is Dan Black of Landland. There are 2 videos that have an interview Q&A session with Dan. I love Dan. When we were students, he did the same thing, overly complicating the design process, because on some level, I think he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing, which is like drawing. Dan should have been fucking drawing, and instead he was finding these overly complicated conceptual ways to turn normal graphic design into that thing. And it's whatever, like you grow through what you go through, as Antoine Dixon says, and I'm sure AA or whatever. But Dan's amazing. That was not the best use of his talents. And I think it speaks to the same thing, which is that we didn't have a good, healthy design process. So we complicated stuff to make it feel like we did. So, done with my contract gig. Now I'm off to Minneapolis College of Art and Design to teach Intro to Typography. Tonight we're gonna look at, what are we looking at? Tour posters, because we're interested in hierarchy and scannability and getting through information. The more you work the hierarchy in these things, the more visual it becomes anyway. But one thing I would definitely, there's a certain amount of drama happening in all of them that I think is really nice. One of the things that happens because your tour dates are so dense is that scale thing kind of starts to happen automatically because that type has to get really small. The readability kind of starts to jump off a cliff over here, with the all caps condensed, thin typeface where the letters are almost touching, and then on top of gray. But the one thing is there's drama. It's chopped into thirds, and then it's chopped sort of into half, and then it goes from yellow, black to gray, and this starts to form a structure. So I think there's some nice stuff happening. But there's this tendency again, fill everything up. But this structure already kind of means that maybe there's a thing to take. Let's see, there's a line right here that ends the US part of this tour and it jumps a month. Mm-hmm. Can November, December, Europe move over here? Can this shift over here? And can we use that structure that's in place and actually use it to amplify meaning, not just be oh, it's cool, it's got this nice structure and it's got this rhythm to it, but then can we also use that as a strategy for organizing stuff? I think the other thing that's hard is okay, it's a poster, but then I'm designing it on a surface this big, and I don't have a printer that lets me print out a poster, right? I have a printer that lets me print out a flyer. So I think it's a very natural thing to kind of automatically design that way because the tool kind of makes you want to do it. Even if we ran these off as big black and white plotter prints downstairs, the first thing, if we just had a bunch of these prints and let's say they were 24 by 36 and I give you a marker and said mark this up, the first thing everybody would do once they saw a big one was be oh, this can all be way smaller. But it's hard to do that on screen because it's when it gets way smaller, it's not readable anymore. And there's it's hard to close that gap, and it's even worse in a class where there's not really a spot to critique, so then we're keeping it digital. It makes it sort of rough. And then we're gonna look at some work, some Jan Tschichold, some management, some Landland, a bunch of other stuff. And we're gonna talk about different ways of affecting hierarchy. I'm really loving this romantic blown out light. I'm not sure how I made that happen, but there's one way to do it where it's you're just doing a favor for the reader But there's also this other more kind of mercenary aspect to it, which is that by finding those differences and playing them up, depending on the kind of designer you are, you become more formal, even if you're a very kind of conservative, cautious designer. Just like actually where I put myself. And then this is this Richard Saul Wurman quote. I believe that information made understandable, information that performs, becomes absolutely and magnificently beautiful, particularly when you don't try to make it beautiful. If you just focus on trying to make this thing understandable and readable, you can create something that's visual. Okay, so really simple hierarchy stuff now. Book cover from the 70s. There's two things happening. Color change, which then changes, helps communicate that if you know nothing about it, you at least know that one of those things is a novel. Though the blue where it says a novel communicates, at least subtly, that Jean Santu is the name of the novel. This is the same technique done like 30 years later by a group called Management. And they used to do this really nice thing. Building is the name of the book, Bill Addis, author, and then in between that, 3,000 years of design, engineering, and construction. And they have specifically scaled it so that even within the subtitle of the book, they're breaking that apart into digestible chunks. And then the same thing follows through with like chapter 6, the harmony of theory and practice, and the dates. And they're making decisions there too, like chapter 6 is important, but it's not that important because once you're there, it's not really useful. The name of the chapter, though, actually means something, and the dates are more important. So, like, even though it's all one size, one font, the way they've organized it, they're making sense of it, as well as paying homage to work like this from the 60s and 70s. And this is another Management piece. Modern House, 3. Super simple. And it lets them create a vibe while still communicating. And then record cover, 6-finger satellite, massive cocaine seizure. There's kind of two things that are happening. There's obviously the color, and then the fact that there's a break between the two. Simple way of delineating it, besides the fact that there's a nice double meaning to massive cocaine seizure. I think it's one of my favorite things in the world. It's the CD cover by Rune Mortenson. It's probably from like 2002. The record's called Frozen by Blizzard Winds. It's probably recorded in Norway. And then, so, Blizzard Winds. Super graphic typeface, and then just really clear changes. And it creates this nice tension, which is that you don't expect to see a fancy black letter typeface used in this super aggressive modernist mode, especially the fact that the barcode is part of the design, which is like, it's not hidden on the back. It's literally like, we have to have a barcode, let's actually make it integral and have it fit into the structure. Same record label, same designer, one great typeface, dim middle shrift, one size, and then split apart into 2 different colors, and then all of a sudden it's like, it's icy and cool. Complex hierarchy. So this is another Tschichold piece. It's a cover of a catalog. I love that the top of it is empty. And there's, we talk about using too many typefaces. I mean, I guess technically he's using 2 typefaces, but he kind of makes it feel like more by the fact that one's Roman in a box, the other one's italic, then you've got the red one, then you've got a heavier version of the red one in black. And we looked a lot at space last week, like how space creates hierarchy, and that's what Tschichold does. And each piece communicates that it's something different in a different way. Like one, there's scale, then there's arrangement, and then there's these things that say like, this is like a subsection of this. And this is small, but it's almost like putting it in that little frame. It just makes it a little stamped. It almost tells you, like, you need this to file it away, but it's not that important. And then this is just a poster I found today that I really liked. But I love how much stuff is happening down in here. So you've got the bands, big, interconnected, next level of information, the dates, the location, the price, and then
kind of hinging off of that is all the other kind of detail stuff. This actually has nothing to do with it. It's just a ticket from the same show. And then this project is pretty fantastic. This level of text is fonts, but this stuff is custom fonts specific for this project. So it's hyper clear, like Afropunk 2018, it's broken up by dates, but then all the subdivision means that it's constantly like asserting the structure of what's happening, like Los Angeles, Paris, London, Brooklyn, Atlanta, Joburg, or Johannesburg, I guess. May, July, August, blah, blah, blah. Like it just keeps going down the line with different levels of information that you can choose to take it from. And then, even without reading this, you understand intellectually this is a subdivision of whatever's happening up here, which is the location for each event. But, and then even that forms additional nice little negative space stuff between things. But it's entirely hierarchy driven, and then it just uses really cool custom fonts to do that so that it keeps like replaying its own structure. And then some messy stuff, because everything we looked at was really clean. I think I showed some Willie Kuhn stuff in the very first talk. The bulk of his practice has been making posters for architecture lectures. I'm not sure how you corner the market on that, but what I find really interesting about this is that it's super complicated, but not, because of the fact that like the variety of stuff that he uses to get his point across. So you've got proximity. This is obviously related to this. This is related to this. And then he uses these background shapes, which are changing to group stuff. So I find it fascinating, like this symposium thing, it comes through and it grabs all of those 5 dates. And then it comes through here and you know that it's not saying mediums and as part of it. If you actually stripped away those shapes, this thing would actually get a lot more visually hard to read. It might be less complicated overall, but it would be much more difficult to navigate. And then he does this nice stuff, right? Like, once you've established that it's summer 04, that's not the most important thing. It's important to figure it out quickly, but then it needs to go away and let you deal with like, going to see Frank Gehry or whoever. And then to show something that's like totally off of the computer. This is a poster by Landland. It's designed on top of screen printed test prints, but hyper clear typography and hierarchy, but very handmade, organic, and human. And so you've got like the headline. These little sub pieces of information are important, but it's about this, and then that connects, and then you get down into the dates, and there's multiple levels of hierarchy just within this. Like Friday, March is treated differently. You have these dates, times, theater, a lot of hierarchy decisions happening, and entirely hand-drawn. Yes, I wanted to end on something totally different. So that's an overview of a lot of different ways to think about and look at hierarchy. One of the things that I think is interesting about this is like some people are very intuitively formal. You dig in and you start pushing stuff around, making stuff bigger or smaller, pulling out details, like playing with things. And other people have to have a reason to make every decision they make. And both of those are fine. What's nice about this, like kind of having an overview of hierarchy decisions, is if you're on that side of things where you have to have a reason for doing things, if you just start thinking about how do I make this scannable, clear, bold, and then you just push towards that, you're gonna inherently make things that are more visual and formal because you start to have big to small, light to dark, dense to spacious, whatever it is, because it's essentially always about opposites. And that if you have a hard time with that kind of formal level of like exploration, just making a decision about, okay, is this different than this? Cool. Now, once I get into that subsection, what's different about these 3 things? Or can I use color across all the cities? and connect those cities. And then like suddenly you're making very formal decisions despite the fact that you don't feel like a formal kind of designer. All right, then how much time do we have? Oh good, lots of time. Then you have plenty of time to work. And if anybody has any technical questions about like, oh, I'm trying to figure out how to do this, then ask away.
I've got an announcement here as well. Some change is gonna come. Over the last few days, I've put out a bunch of long kind of single issue videos. 18 minutes up to 20, 25 minutes. What I've realized today is that I really like these long videos, but they take a ton because it takes a super long time to edit them. And like the one I worked on yesterday, what I realized was it was all encompassing in my mind because I was going back and re-recording bits and pieces and trying to get this kind of, I don't know, epic 25-minute video about something done in a day. And it's not the way to do it. And I think we're going to switch the model up here. So it's kind of this slice of life, but it's got some value. And that's what I'm going to shoot for with this new format, is a little bit more of like a collage-y daily mixtape, but with real chunks of stuff that I hope is of value. And then I'm going to take those longer ones, like the creative block one from earlier this week. Those are going to start coming out once a week, and they'll be more involved. I think I may have even hit the point where I'm like, these need some motion graphics. We'll see if I go that far, but I'm pretty pleased with those few that came out this week, and it occurs to me that I should not, it occurs to me that I should pull them back and do it right. So that's a change that is on the horizon. We're going to keep these videos a bit shorter, a bit lighter, but I think when I post them, I do also plan to include kind of a table of contents in the description so that you can jump to some of the pieces that might address a concern or something you're interested in.